Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is this is September, it's my birthday month, September edition of IndyAWS. Welcome all. We're excited to have you all here. So my name is Calvin Hendricks Parker. I am one of the co-organizers of IndyAWS. We're excited to have you all here for the meetup. We've got an exciting speaker. I'm excited because it's a topic I don't know very well. I always love learning new stuff, but let me share my screen real quick. Make sure you're following us on IndyAWS on Twitter, or use the hashtag IndyAWS to tweet about the session or anything you find. The Twitter account also tweets out more info about things that are going on in the IndyAWS community, so you can follow that for info on us. I want to thank our sponsors, 6 Feet Up. We are a Python and cloud consulting company. 6 Feet Up is a software company that helps organizations build apps faster, innovate with AI, leverage cloud technology. Moving right along, if you are looking for a job, or if you have a job posting, someone you would like to hire a position for, we are on the Indie Hackers Slack. So that bit.ly link will get you an invite link to Indie Hackers, which is a local tech consortium group of lots of different meetups. There's a jobs channel in there, so please post your job channel in there, or your job or what you're looking for in the jobs channel. We like to make sure folks get connected to one another. Let me go ahead and turn this over to Kyle, because I think that's where we're at now. Who's going to talk to us about AWS Amplify and building modern mobile applications.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle Lee. I'm a senior developer advocate. Can you guys still see my screen? It's showing like a red block on my screen.
Yeah, I saw that too. Someone
still maybe it was just like a little glitch. But anyways, I'm a senior developer advocate at AWS on the Amplify team, and today I'm here to talk about building modern apps with AWS Amplify. So just a little bit of a background on myself. I'm a self-taught developer. I learned primarily through free resources that I could find online about 6 years ago, and I've been continuing to build my education through like projects that I work on and just working at different companies. So I primarily focus on mobile development, iOS primarily, and then I also touch Android and Flutter development as well. And I also have a YouTube channel where I put out programming tutorials as well. So if you want to check that out, you can find me at Kilo Loco. So yeah. So now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the expectations of modern apps, just real quick. And essentially what a lot of people are looking for in regards to modern apps is that they're snappy, right? You don't want to open up your new favorite app and then your app is moving all slow, whether it's a mobile app or a web app. You want everything to react very quickly, whether it's like hitting the like button on something, or you're trying to share some type of article. Any of those things you want them to happen extremely quickly. And if there's anything that's like hitting the back end, so you have your front end and you have your back end, when the user's interacting with your front end, you want the communication between the front end and the back end to be extremely fast. Now, in regards to communication between those two things, sometimes a customer or a user is not going to have internet service. So they might not be on Wi-Fi, they might be on their cellular network, and they don't have the best internet speeds. So essentially, what's going to happen is your app is going to behave a specific way based off of your implementation. Now, if you're depending on having perfect cellular speeds or perfect Wi-Fi speeds, and you don't concern yourself with what happens if a user loses internet connection or things like that, then what's going to happen with that user's app is it could just have a terrible experience, and you could essentially just brick your user's phone. Like, nobody wants to be on their mobile phone and then open up an app and then it's just useless, right? Like, that's so annoying. So essentially what users want is to be able to use their apps, whether it's like a communication app or not. They want to be able to go on that app whether they have Wi-Fi or whether they have internet connection or not. So that's another thing that most modern apps are kind of expected to do. And then like one of the last things is essentially having real-time information and communication. So let's say that we're on a social media app and there's some new trend that's going around, and or maybe it's like a news alert, right? And you want to know what's the latest information about that specific topic. And what would be ideal is that you can kind of implement or you could kind of show that information to the user without them having to like do pull to refresh, or for them to close the app and then go back into the app. Essentially, they want real-time data, especially for communication apps when it comes to like text message chat and things like that. So real-time data is very important for modern apps. Everybody wants to be up to speed with the latest information. So let's go ahead and talk about how the offline first paradigm mind shift or architecture shift can kind of solve a lot of these problems. And a little bit to talk about this. So essentially the offline first paradigm is where you're going to be, instead of interacting directly with the backend and relying on internet connection in order to get your data and present that data directly to the user, what you're going to do is you're going to essentially set up a persistence layer so that instead of displaying data that's shown from the internet, you're showing data that's persisted locally on the device, whether it's saved in a database or some other type of persistence layer that you have set up. It's going to essentially be reading directly from the device and showing that data as opposed to waiting for internet connection to show it. So if there's no internet, then you can lose users. If you have like interaction delays, then you can lose users. And then also, if you're constantly hitting the backend, what you could do is you could increase the bill for those users. And with this offline first paradigm, it kind of removes these problems. And you can kind of see a little bit of what I was talking about in terms of how this data flow works. So what would happen is the user interface, like when a user hits a button on an app, what would happen is that message would be sent to the app backend and trigger some type of API. When that API gets a response, it comes back into the app, but before it's displayed to the user, what's happening is it goes through the persistence layer or the local database, and it saves the updated response there in the database. And then from the local database, what you'll actually have is that information sent over to the user interface, and then everything is updated from there. So there's one layer in between receiving the data, but sending the data up to the backend is essentially the same. And the reason why I bring this up, and the reason why this is so important, aside from just solving all the problems that I mentioned before, is the fact that it is one of the primary ways that AWS Amplify has decided to move forward. It's a very opinionated service, and that's what we're going to be talking about now. So so a little bit about AWS Amplify. It's a lot of different things, but essentially it's a suite of tools that's going to make the life easier for front end and mobile developers. And what you can do is you can configure your backends, you can spin up backend services, any resources that are relevant to your app, whether it's a website or a mobile app. It will allow you to deploy your front end if you're doing like some type of hosting. And then also it will allow you to manage the users on your team and the content within your app as well. So it does a lot of different things, and it works on several different platforms. And I'm going to primarily show you like the the mobile platforms, because I am an iOS developer, but it does work on, front end. You could use vanilla JavaScript or any of the, well, not any, but like a lot of the very popular JavaScript frameworks, which I'm not too familiar with, so I won't go too deep into that. But yeah, it will essentially meet you where you're at. So if you're working with some type of front end where you're maybe using Next.js, then you can use Amplify with that. If you're a Flutter developer, then you can also use Flutter and Amplify together. So you can set up your app with that. A couple of the different categories that are offered by Amplify are analytics, API, authentication, data store, predictions, and storage. So a little bit on what this actually means. So categories are essentially use cases that you're trying to solve in your app. And this is the way that Amplify is kind of built. It's built to solve specific problems around the most common use cases using existing AWS resources, which you don't need to know much about. So a great example is, and my favorite one is DataStore and API. So DataStore and API, they work together to persist data. And what would happen is, let's say you have an app where you need to save something to the backend. You have some data, you need to save it to the backend so that you can retrieve it later from a different device or another user can see it, right? You want to send chat messages, or if you want to save a to-do or something like that, then you would use something like DataStore and API together. The data store is kind of the persistence layer that we were talking about, where all the data is going to be stored, and then you can pull and read data directly to your UI. The API is the portion that actually connects data store to your backend resources and allows you to sync that data to the cloud. So when you're looking to achieve a specific use case in your app, what you would do is you would look at the categories and see which one of the categories is going to work best for you. If you wanted to save images for your app, then you would use something like storage. That's built for file storage. It's backed by S3. So you'll be able to save audio, video, pictures, whatever files that you would normally save to S3, you can save to storage. And that's the idea behind categories for AWS Amplify, is that, you know, I have a use case, I want to solve it. Which category do I use? Now, going back over to data store, and we'll touch on this just really quickly. Data store and API, like I said, they work together. And data store, like I said, is the persistence layer. On mobile, I believe they use like SQLite or SQLite databases for local data storage. I forgot what was used on web. Don't use web, so I don't really pay attention to what's exactly used. But essentially, there's some type of local persistence that's done on both front end and mobile. And then when you're ready to have that data sent to your back end, which is a database that's backed by DynamoDB, then what would happen is AWS Appsync is that synchronization layer. So it syncs the data from your local database to your backend, and any changes that happen in your backend are also synced to your local database. And that's kind of the short of what's being explained in this slide. So you have Appsync essentially powering everything using GraphQL. Now, let's talk a little bit about essentially developing with Amplify. And you'll see that if we're working our way from left to right, you'll see that you're going to start off with a model. And since DataStore is backed by Appsync, we're going to be working with GraphQL data schemas. So you build out a schema, a GraphQL schema for your models. From there, like let's say you would have like a user, right? And a user would have a name. So you would have the name as a property, and it's going to be a string. And you could specify also any relationships to the user. So a user might have a post or something like that. So then you would also have a post schema. And we're going to cover this in the demo as well. But essentially, you would build out that schema in GraphQL, or you could do it in the admin UI, which is a GUI that we're going to actually look at in a couple minutes. You can also set up authentication and authorization for your users and for your team members as well. So who has access to what, all that can be managed. Once that's all set up, what you're going to do is when you have your backend resources set up, whether it be authentication, data storage, whatever it is, what you would do is you're going to use the Amplify CLI locally on your machine in order to get those configuration files into your app. So, as you may know, AWS very secure. Everything's based on making sure that only you, the important person, is able to access your very sensitive information, and you don't want other people accessing those resources. So what you would do is you use the Amplify CLI, pull those configuration files locally into your app, and then you would also use whatever package manager is relevant for your platform. So that could be NPM, it could be a Swift package manager, it could be what is the one for Flutter, PubSpec. I forgot what exactly it was, but essentially you would bring those libraries into your app so that you could code against them, and you could write the logic that's relevant for your front end to interact. So you hit a button, you would interact with the library, you would set up whatever the API is, and then you could send data to your backend securely. So that's going to happen through the sync engine, kind of like I explained before, but you know, we could touch on a little bit on that in the demo as well. Now, this is the part where we're actually going to go through a lot. Like I know that a lot of people here probably have experience with different AWS services, and I kind of want to show you the admin UI, where it kind of makes AWS much easier to consume as maybe somebody that's just getting started, or somebody like me that doesn't have a strong knowledge around all the different AWS services that can be used to achieve some type of outcome. Like I said, the categories are going to determine which resources you want to use, and the admin UI puts a GUI around that so that you can easily set those resources up. So I'll be showing you that right in a couple seconds. But generally, if you wanted to just try out the admin UI without having like an AWS account attached, and you wanted to just test the persistence layer, then you can actually use the admin UI sandbox. So you could go to or you could go to sandbox.amplifyapp.com, and you'll see a UI that looks like this, and you'll actually be able to go through the get started flow, where you can you know, choose that if you wanted to get set up with data, and you could like start modeling your schemas. So if you had an app idea and you wanted to start seeing what type of relationships would be relevant, you can use the sandbox admin UI to start building out those relationships, see how everything fits together, and then you can actually have that model used inside your app, and you can pull it locally and start testing it out. So this is the part that I won't go too deep into today. Like I said, I'm a mobile developer. I don't want to bore you with the iOS portion of it. But if you want, we could go a little bit deeper. But let me show you a demo of what it's like to get started on the sandbox admin UI, and then what it's also like to go through the full-fledged process of getting started with AWS Amplify. So, and before I start the demo, are there any questions that anybody wanted me to address?
I haven't seen any come across in the chat, so
Okay.
I'd say forge ahead.
Let's do it. All right. So I'm gonna be facing like this, but I'm gonna be looking like this. So I'm gonna be like this. Okay. So what we're gonna do is I'm already here at the AWS console, probably a screen y'all are pretty familiar with. And let me make sure it's big enough so we can see everything. So when you're just getting started, you know, you can search for Amplify like that. Just type it up into the search bar at the top. You click on it. You'll see a different screen than what you're seeing right here. Obviously, I've been using Amplify for a while. I have a couple of projects. And what you would do is I think there's like a get started or a new app button, but essentially you would hit some type of orange button. And what you would want to do is you want to get started with creating the backend. So like I said, Amplify is here to build out the backend resources that are relevant for your app. So we'll go ahead and create one. And it's as simple as entering in a name. So we could just do IndyAWS demo, right? So then once we confirm deployment, what it's going to do is it's going to create a project in the background, and it's going to start, it's going to essentially make a space so that we can like start interacting with the admin UI. And this takes about 2 to 3 minutes to set up. But as you can see here, it's going to give you a little bit of like an informative loading screen if this is your first time. So as you can see, you'll be able to manage your front end. If you're a web developer, you'll be able to do some things on the front end in regards to like hosting your website or things like that. But what we're going to be primarily looking at today is mostly this back end portion. We'll see this after we're done creating our Amplify app. we'll also see the primary dashboard. There's like a number of different things that we can do with the admin UI, but we're going to primarily focus on authentication and the data storage portions of it, because those are the features that that allow you to go the furthest and are the most common features for an app, right? Signing in a user and saving something to a database, pretty common. So there's that. We also have some of the logs. So if you're interested in knowing what's going on with your Amplify resources, you can actually see like the deployment status on the different resources that are being spun up. And you can actually view all of this in CloudFormation, because it uses CloudFormation in order to set up a lot of this stuff. I believe you can work with CDK. I've never worked with CDK before, but you could also do something very similar with CDK. It looks like our app is done being set up. And as you can see, it brings us immediately to our app, which we called IndyAWS demo. We're already set on the backend environments. And what we want to do is we want to open the admin UI. So we open this up, and it's going to show us that dashboard that I just had on screen right here before. And we can see like all the things that I've processed so far. So first we just created the backend, and then we just created the environment. So by default, you'll be creating a staging environment. And then once you're at the point to where you want to publish your app, then you can create a separate environment for production if you wanted to do that. So let's go ahead and talk about the two things that I mentioned, which are authentication and data. So we'll start with authentication. And as you can see, just 2 steps in order to set up authentication. You don't really need to know much about Cognito. Authentication is all backed by Amazon Cognito. But if you just wanted to get up and running, then you could just simply make a couple of clicks, and then you can start up a couple of different things, right? So you can reuse any existing authentication resources, or you could start from scratch, which is what we're going to do here. So if we didn't want to sign up with email and we wanted to sign up with username, then you can select username. If you wanted to add different login mechanisms, you can do it, but you have to set it up with what was it? You have to set it up with one of these or the other, and then you can add other authentication points through the CLI, but not through the admin UI. But we're just going to start off with username. So once we have an authentication or a login mechanism, then we can determine whether we want multi-factor authentication or not. And you'll see that it supports SMS right here, and you can just simply enter what message you want to be sent to a user, and how do you want it to be enforced and things like that. We can keep it off if you want to keep it very basic. And then also the attributes. So usually when you're signing up with username, you're still going to need to authenticate a user through Cognito using the email address. So what we would normally do is we could add in any of these attributes that we want it to be saved for a user in our Cognito user pool. But we definitely want to make sure that we have email saved so that we can send that authentication email. And then you also have a couple of things for password protection. So you could set how secure a password needs to be. Do you want to include the lowercase, the uppercase, numerals, and symbols? How many, like length and things like that. So how complex do you really want it to be? And once again, we're going to be using email, or you could obviously choose SMS, but either or. And then you would be able to essentially launch your auth flow from there. So if you wanted to set all this up and have it create a Cognito user pool for you, then you could do that. And it would be with this fixed form values before. Oh, let's see. Let me restart. Let me reload this screen. I may have clicked one too many things and missed an argument that needed to be added. But let's see. We want it to have username and email. Oh, email's already selected. Oh, okay. So we wanted to have, we'll remove this login mechanisms because we said username, and then we wanted to also include email. There we go. And then what we would do is we can modify any of these, and then we could just simply hit deploy. So whenever you do a deployment, since it's going to be spinning up all the resources for you, it's going to take like, I think authentication takes about 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. And then depending on how complex your resources are, it could take a little bit longer, but yeah, it's going to set all that stuff up for you. So if you have knowledge on Cognito, you could also use an existing one. You could go to Cognito, set it up, and then you could actually use it right here in the admin UI, as I showed you the existing authentication flow. We started from scratch right here though, but you could use those as well. Now, while that's deploying, let's see if we could modify the data model. Now, this is the part where I was talking about having a data model or a schema that you would normally set up with GraphQL. So what we can do is we could add models here, and they're going to be represented in GraphQL when we pull that model locally. So if I wanted to have something like a client, right? Like I have a client, and a client is going to have a name, and the name is going to be a string property, right? Then what would happen is we would be able to generate this model and then pull it locally. And then based off of whatever platform you're on, it's going to generate the code into your native language. So if you're doing a front end website, it's going to generate the models for you, the client model for you in JavaScript. If you're doing iOS, it's going to generate it for you in Swift. Flutter, it's going to generate it for you in Dart. So we can also add relationships to other models. So like if I had a client and maybe they had a business, and the business name, business also has a name, and that's also going to be required. What we could do is we could add relationships between these two models. So a client would have, or actually would probably say a business would have multiple clients, maybe, I don't know. It just depends on how you're building your app. So let's say we had a client, and let's say one business has many clients, right? And clients, and now we built this one-to-many relationship between business and client. And you'll actually see that we have this field right here called clients. It's a one-to-many, and then it also creates the business ID on the client object itself. So now when we pull it locally, what will happen is we'll actually be able to see that connection. Now, since we're still deploying the authorization, what I can show you is, let's see, while we wait for that and authentication is done, this one's taking a little bit longer than usual, but let's see, what can I show you while we wait? Well, we could take a look at the user management portion. It's still deploying, so we can't really look at it in full. But what you'll notice is that we have users and groups, and you can set up your users and groups, and this will also allow you to set up things like having admins for your app. So like if only admins are allowed to do specific things, then you could do that. Or if you wanted to have like editors for, like, let's say you have a blog, right? And you would have a group of editors, you'd have a group of publishers, you'd have the authors, things like that. You could have separate groups for your users. So our authentication actually finally finished deploying. We get this little message up here at the top, deployment successful. And then we also can save and deploy our model. So let's go ahead and deploy this. And let's go back over to users so I could kind of show you what we can do right here. So we could create a user. This will be Kyle Lee. And then we can enter in email at amazon.com and super hard password to figure out. I actually don't think I spelled password right. So let's see, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. I may not have. You can't do password. You have to do something a little bit more secure. But let's see if I could do something that's a little bit more secure. So temporary 31 exclamation point. Let's see if that'll work. I'm really bad at creating passwords on the
Yeah,
fly
Kyle,
when they're secure.
you gotta do better than that. They gotta get at least one capital in there.
Oh, that's right. That's right. There we go. Oh, it's not letting me. All right. So yeah, you're gonna have to enter in a secure password. Let's see if I could actually enter in one of my real ones. And hopefully, oh, it doesn't seem to be working. Well, you know how demos go. Never seem to work when you're trying to show it off. Same thing like when your car breaks down and you take it to the person to fix it. Let's see. All right.
Oh man, you gotta be super secure here.
Oh, you know what it is? It's because my my username. So the username, this is going to be the actual unique username, and you can't have spaces in it. So what I'll do is I'll just do my name like this, and that should do it. So it wasn't actually my password; it was my username. So if you wanted to include spaces on your app, then what you would do is you'd probably do like something like percentage encoding, and do like a percentage 20 or something like that. But yeah, so we would have a user here, and then you can see the different status right here for the user. And then you could also go to like group memberships. We don't have any groups. We could create a group, and let's go ahead and create one right now. And this would be like admin. So now we would have like admins, and then we would also have users, and then we could put them in specific groups. And then that would allow only admins to make specific changes on our data models. And, you know, we could let the backend determine whether a specific user can, you know, modify or create or delete any of the data that's entered in. And you can see like there's a group relationship right here as well. So I think our data should have been deployed. Did we deploy it? Yeah, I think we did deploy it. And now if I wanted to pull it locally, it's actually going to give us deployment steps if I wanted to do it locally. So first I would choose which platform I'm on. So a lot of people would probably choose JavaScript, but I'm an iOS person, so I'm going to choose iOS. And then I'm going to select which client or which model, and I'll choose client, and it's actually going to show me how to save that data. So I know that a lot of you are in here are probably JavaScript developers, so it would look something like this, but the APIs are essentially very simple to work with. In here, you're just going to work with an object. I assume that's the proper terminology for y'all. So client, you enter in the object with key value pairs, and then you would just simply save it. Or if you wanted to update it, it's going to look exactly the same. Oh, well, I guess on JavaScript, it's a little bit different. In my languages, it's usually the same. But essentially, you would use the same API, which is the .save API. And then updating and deleting are pretty straightforward as well. So what you would do is you would query the model that you want to delete, and you delete it. Or if you just wanted to query it, this is what it would look like as well. So that is just a rough overview of the models. The last thing that I want to show you is that you'll actually be able to seed some. Well, we have complex models, so we can't see data for these complex models, I don't think. We might be able to get away with it on client because it's not a required relationship. But if you have simple data, then we can simply seed data in, and we could generate some data. So since our client model, which we take a look at here, is a relatively simple model right here, and it doesn't have any like direct relationships the way that business does, we can seed some data. And if we take a look at the content, we would actually be able to pull this this data into our app using like the query method. And we would just simply get some lorem ipsum, but it will help us get up and running so that we don't have to build out the whole entire creation process in the app. But that's pretty much it for the demo. Did anybody have any questions in regards to in regards to Amplify or anything that I covered?
So with the current setup here, can you set up multiple environments? Can you have like a dev, staging, and production environment easily?
Yeah, so as you can see, we
Oh,
have
yeah,
the
see, so I didn't see, didn't even
the
notice the top
staging.
there.
Yeah, we have the staging environment, and then let's see, believe it was. So you don't think you need to explain six without. I forgot how to do it in the admin UI, but essentially, what you would do is you could have separate environments, and they could have different authentication implementations for each of the environments. I know how to do it the Amplify CLI, and
So I assume then you can release a change to your model and staging, test it, and then somehow promote that into production.
yeah. So in regards to doing something like that, you have to keep in mind that it is backed by DynamoDB. So anything that you would normally run into with DynamoDB, you would run into with Amplify. So in regards to migrations, if you were to just randomly add a new field, if it's additive, usually things will just work. But if you're modifying an existing field, then what you're probably going to want to do is you're going to want to properly migrate all the data based off of that specific change. So if you were changing like the type from a string to an integer, then you would want to make sure you modify the data in the backend as well, because that can also cause some like synchronization issues with the
Right.
front
So
end.
as a developer on this, I would be responsible for writing that migration if I was doing some kind of transformation on an existing field before I
Yeah,
promoted that
yeah.
model to production.
Yeah, if you're making transformations on existing fields, then that's something that you are going to be responsible for. Um, I believe that we do have something in the works down the pipeline where we're trying to address that and make it a little bit easier. But right now, you're just completely responsible for when you're modifying fields and making sure that all the data that you're planning on syncing to the device, which is based off of the schema. So, like if you had an integer and now it's supposed to be a string, if the device is expecting a string, it won't be able to decode that data manually. You'll have to make sure that the data is coming through properly yourself.
So it really sounds like you still want to use the CLI and like your own dev tools locally for this. Like
Yeah.
developing
So
through,
the so
developing through the web seems to still be kind of a quick, nice and demo, but it really feels like if you're going to do this for real, you should be doing file system and using the CLI.
yeah. So to get started, I would definitely recommend going through the admin UI, especially if you're coming from a background like me where you don't have a lot of experience directly touching DynamoDB or Cognito or whatever. Um, but yes, as you progress, you're going to actually start working with the CLI a lot more, and then you'll actually have much more control over how you configure your backend, and if you want to set up different lambdas to communicate with and things like that.
I also just allowed folks to unmute themselves. I think we got a safe group here now. So if you have questions for Kyle, feel free to unmute and ask. I know
I
James
had a
had a
question.
question. Yeah.
On the data store save API. I remember you had a slide that it looked like the save sends a request to the backend. And then once the backend completes, it then updates the local client-side database, which presumably would then refresh the UI. Is that the case, or does the data store save local database first and then update the backend so it does it more optimistically on the front end?
So by default, what it would do is it would save locally, and then Appsync would relay that information to the backend and cause the sync. But you could perform the same. You could go directly to the backend and do an API request. So when you see AWS Amplify, you'll actually see two different categories. you'll see DataStore, and then there'll be API. You need to use both of them together if you want to work with a database, but you can use API by itself. And what you could do with API is you could take more advantage of the GraphQL manipulations and mutations, and you can send those directly to the backend. And then when the backend event fires that there's been a mutation, that synchronization will happen locally, and it will essentially go through that persistence layer and then spit out the data that you would essentially be using to modify your UI. So in short, the graph that I showed you before, it's not exact unless you actually use API by itself. If you use DataStore by itself, then it's going to go through that persistence layer, and then Appsync is going to make the synchronization happen automatically.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Awesome. So David's got a question.
Hello, yes, thank you. Nice talk. I have not used Amplify yet, but I'm very interested in doing it. But when my question is, okay, I can set up the data modeling, for example, that which is DynamoDB on the backend. How hard is when I grow more than Amplify to take my application out of Amplify and start doing it outside of Amplify? So
I think it kind of depends on which resources you would use. I mean, that's like going to always be the answer, right? Like it depends, but like it does depend, because you can directly access the database tables that you like. You'll be able to see the data directly in the tables and DynamoDB, and you could just theoretically just start using that however you want. You could use the individual resources however you want because they've already been spun up. And then how you interact with them outside using, like if you wanted to interact with them through a Lambda function, that's totally up to you. So it's only as hard as it would normally be in regards to using any of those resources. Now, Amplify does have some modifications that are set in place in order to keep the synchronization in check. So like if you have two modifications to the same item or same object, then what it does is it uses a increment counter, and there's a couple of other fields that are important to DataStore specifically to keep all the sync in check. But essentially, if you are planning on using both Amplify and you're trying to use the resources separately, you just kind of have to follow the already implemented conventions that you'll see set up on the specific resource, whether it be S3, DynamoDB, or Cognito. And then you would generally want to kind of stay within those conventions, because if you go outside those conventions and you try to make it work with Amplify later, it's probably not going to work, right? So I hope that answers your question. Like overall, it just kind of depends on what you're trying to do specifically.
Yes,
but
I think
it's just a resource at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Another question. Have you seen that in the wild? Someone that developed an application in Amplify and needs to take it out of Amplify?
I haven't seen too much of taking it out of Amplify because you're still using the same resources that you normally be using, right? Like the most popular ones, DynamoDB, it's scalable, S3, scalable, Cognito, very popular. So I haven't really seen Amplify taken out. What I usually see is trying to bring existing resources in. So that's mostly what I've seen. And it started off, sorry, I have an incoming meeting. Let me just turn that off.
That was actually kind of my question, is like bringing extra resources in. Like if I wanted to use the REST API tab in this application or in the admin UI, can I use it as a service gateway to now expose other like Lambdas or API gateways behind the scenes for my app?
So with that, they are separate Lambdas. You just would follow us. I haven't worked too much with the Lambda portion because it's done in JavaScript and I just don't generally write JavaScript. But you could reuse those Lambdas, or you could have it, you could have other Lambdas interact with the created resources, right? So like I said, they're just resources that are being spun up for you using CloudFormation. So it's like a wrapper of CloudFormation to address these specific use cases and make it easier for the developer.
Mhm.
And then what you do with those resources after that is totally up to you, but they are set. There are some modifications to make everything work seamlessly when you're in the Amplify, workflow.
So I
Essentially, does
assume
that
the,
answer your question?
kind of. I assume the REST API is like an API gateway inside of AWS that you can go
The
and
REST
add additional
API
paths.
is it's not API gateway. What it is it's a Lambda function that you would that would be spun up for you, and then you can modify the Lambda, the boilerplate Lambda. I think it creates like the common CRUD operations for you, and then you can make further modifications to the Lambda itself after that.
Right, because I assume that this provides some kind of default API endpoint for my application that's
Yeah.
powered by all the Amplify stuff.
It's not like an exposed endpoint, like
Okay.
WW something, right? It's
Right,
it's going to be
how the Flutter or whatever application I've written on the front end still has to talk to the backend application. It must have some kind of endpoint or some kind of service gateway that it's talking to. Can I augment that service gateway with additional paths or API calls?
yes, you can, but I haven't done it personally. So I know that you can. What you would do is, and it's in the documentation, and what you would do is you would go to like the API section. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at it.
That's a handy URL.
Yeah.
Amplify.aws.
So I'm guessing most people are JavaScript. So I'm just going to do API, and let's say we're going to do the API REST endpoint. You could do the GraphQL one as well, but so let's look at like updating data, and let's see. So you have this post endpoint. It's not like an end. It's not it's not like a URL that you would do. You would interact with it through the library, and you would say post and then the API name. So like as you can see
so
here,
I see what you're saying.
specifying and
there's a library I bring into my front end application that talks Amplify, and then it understands how to do all that communication. I'm not talking directly to the API in my app. I'm talking to the Amplify library.
yes.
Okay.
And then based off of that, you would get some type of response based off of whatever is expected.
Is the Amplify library making HTTP calls, or is it connected via some kind of WebSocket connection?
I don't know for certain. It would also depend on the specific request that is being performed. If I had to guess, the query and the post are probably going to be like a HTTP one. But if you wanted to do something like observing data, which I'm not sure if API can do or not, but I do know that you can subscribe to GraphQL changes. I would assume something like that would be built on top of a socket, because it's like real-time updates.
Well, if it's making HTTP requests and they live in a space that's proprietary to Amplify and not in the API gateway space, I'm wondering, to David's point, because I wondered, is there anything in Amplify that couldn't be imported into a CloudFormation stack? If you say you wanted to get out of Amplify, you want to create a CloudFormation stack and import all those resources, is there any secret sauce that would not come along for the ride into that CloudFormation stack? If you said, I want to go over here and then I'll just stop using anything in Amplify, I'll never touch that console again. I got this stack, I'm going to do the things.
I don't think so. This part, like the CloudFormation part, is beyond my experience. I don't have a lot of familiarity with it, so I don't want to answer incorrectly. But I would think that there's nothing that's going to stop you from using those resources or taking that CloudFormation stack that's set up through Amplify and pushing it further. I wouldn't think so.
Does it? Does it
I
create a
don't know.
cloud formation stack inside of it? Like, does Amplify create one of those for us?
I believe so. Yeah, I
Oh,
believe
okay,
so.
Ken says it does. So it sounds like there's nothing truly magical. This is just kind of masking some of that cloud formation
Yeah,
stuff from the developer. Oh,
yeah,
there's Ken.
that's mostly my understanding, is that it's essentially, like I said, it's primarily focusing on the categories based off of the use cases that you're trying to solve.
So you could stub this out with Amplify and then shift all that junk over into your own repository and start building a real app on top of it. That's the impression I get.
Yeah, I based off of what you said, yeah, I believe so. But yes, you
Mhm.
can also use Amplify to build like full-fledged production apps as well too.
I think that's what I got from my question. As you say, Amplify is not really a different service. It's
High-level
grouping a
API.
lot of services that already exist. But you are using the same services. They are not different ones.
Well, and it automatically delivers these models to you and stuff like that, helps you build your client code.
Yeah,
totally makes
so
sense.
it will allow you to create one backend, and then essentially you're able to bring all those resources easily into several different platforms. So you could have the same backend and resources all set up to iOS, to Android, to your front end using JavaScript, and it's going to essentially give you all the same APIs, or like very similar APIs across each of those platforms.
Can I ask what I hope is a quick question?
Yeah.
Is there a provided basically, I guess, pattern for a multi-user app where each user wants their data to be private to themselves, like a to-do app or a notes app?
Yeah, I would have to look that up, but I believe it's on the Amplify GitHub. Samples.
You can get a lot of the auth pieces from the Amplify directives if you're using the Appsync portion, and that will limit what the user can query.
Yeah, so that feature set like exists for each of the individual platforms, but in regards to having like a full-fledged app to reference, I believe it's under the samples repo, but I forgot the exact endpoint. Here's one for JavaScript that I could leave in the chat. I'm assuming that you're probably asking in regards to maybe a JavaScript app.
I'm thinking Flutter, but that's fine.
Flutter? Oh, okay. I don't think that they have one for Flutter. There is one for iOS coming out.
Okay.
But yeah, overall, it's going to be under the Amplify repo. And then you're going to essentially search for samples. And I believe that they are working on one, but I don't know what the exact release date will be.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, awesome. Any more questions for Kyle?
I'm not sure if my question is the same as the last one, but I know that Cognito offers authentication. And a lot of times when you want to grant direct access from the user to AWS resources, say to a DynamoDB table, often you might use their Cognito unique identifier as a data partition, and then use a policy variable that says, hey, this person can access Cognito, but only under a shard subset. So something in the identifier that has their unique identifier. So imagine I'm user 123. Well, let's use S3 bucket, for example. I have an S3 bucket. Everyone can upload their user photos, but each person can only access S3 / the photo bucket / and then their user ID / and then whatever they want. So in that way, each person can access their own files, but not each other's files. Is there something in Amplify that is like policy variables that can be used to indicate, in the absence of doing that lower level policy variable stuff, that just says, hey, I want this user to be able to access only their own subset of this AWS resource?
Yeah, sure. So I forgot exactly what it's called, but we could look it up really quickly. The two use cases that I feel like are most common for that type of thing are going to be like you mentioned, like S3, so file storage, and then like data. So I think they're called something different on both of them. I'm going to search under iOS and then I'll flip it over to JavaScript afterwards. But what was it called? File access level. Yeah. So for your specific example, with S3 and storage, because that's what storage is using, it's using S3, it would use file access levels. And let me see if I can switch this to JavaScript so it makes a little bit more sense for the majority. So right here in the docs, it's called file access levels. And you can find under your specific example with S3 and storage. So it'd be under storage file access levels. And you would essentially do something like this when you're doing configure. You would essentially set the level. So you could do private, public, or what is the third one? Protected. So then you could have like files that are public to everybody, or if you only want them to be relevant to the person that's that like uploaded them or something like that, then you could do private, or you could have a little bit of flexibility with protected. And that's where you could do something like with the user, the identity ID. So to answer your question in short, yes, but you're still doing it through the library's API. So the way that you might have done it in the past would be a little bit different, because you're going to be sending it through an API to access or to create those files, and then you would set the access from there. Does that make sense?
Yep, thanks.
Okay, and you could do the same thing with data as well. So
because assuming you get like row level protection on Dynamo rows based on incognito ID, like a similar way.
Yeah, I don't know if it's exactly that, because I don't know exactly what row level access necessarily means. I don't want to say that they're exactly the same thing, but
it sounds like it's a feature of DynamoDB that you're just leveraging, that Amplify is exposing via the libraries you can use on your front end.
Yes.
Nice.
I would have to
it's like
set up authorization rules.
Some suggested best practices based on how this app using Amplify.
Yeah, so like you could like kind of how I was showing where you can set up groups in your admin UI. You can restrict access or mutations or queries against a specific model or model type based off of what group they're in. And you can kind of see that. That's kind of what this is trying to represent right here. We have your model, which has the auth rules of only allowing the owner to see that specific model. So my to-do, right? Versus, my public post or something like that.
Yeah, nice. And so I assume the major backend for this is going to be targeting Dynamo and like S3. There's no RDS, there's no relational database native integrations.
So I believe that what you could do is you could create an escape hatch and actually work with you can work with other databases, but I haven't seen it done before. Okay. So theoretically, I think you can, but ideally it's just going to, because once you go down that path, like
right,
you're essentially pioneering. So
right. Well,
with GraphQL, right? You can do it with GraphQL.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. Ken says you can use a Lambda resolver to talk to RDS, but it sounds like you're off the reservation at that point, and you're responsible for security, ACLs, control over that data.
Yeah, it's just like whenever you go down one of these paths, it's going to essentially limit the amount of people that have gone through that specific use case, and then resources will essentially start becoming more scarce the deeper you go. So that's the only warning I would essentially give against that.
Awesome. Cool. Any other questions for Kyle? Well, I want to thank Kyle for being here with us in the rough start. Apologize for that, but I think we got it back on track and didn't have any more issues. I've got some learning lessons for the next meetup now. I hate locking stuff down, but it sounds like the internet's just not the nice place we thought it was. Cool. Well, Kyle,
live and learn, right?
Yeah, exactly. Everyone needs to give Kyle a big round of applause and thank you
Welcome to
for
the
being
internet.
with us. Yeah, welcome to. I mean, I've been around a long time, and
Thanks, Kyle.
no one likes to be
no
attacked.
worries.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you all for
so
having
much.
me.
Yeah, thanks you all. Thank everyone for showing up. We will be here again the third Tuesday of the month next month for IndyAWS. I don't know if we have a speaker. Laura, do we have a speaker for next month? I don't think we do yet.
We do have a speaker.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, Dave,
yes.
I thought you were going to talk at IndyPie. Dave is talking Indy, but no, Dave is talking at IndyPie, right?
I've asked him.
Talking in this one or the other one?
The other one.
The other one.
In IndyPie. Okay.
Yeah. So Dave,
You're right. This is AWS.
Yeah. Well, welcome to our speaker for next month. IndyPie is David Soul. But for next month in IndyAWS, I think we have a speaker as well.
We do. His name is Suman, maybe? I forget exactly, but I can find it.
Okay. We'll post that
Online.
into the Slack channel, and we'll also send out a wrap-up email along with a link to the recording. The recording will not include the intro bits. It'll just include the actual presentation. So don't worry about that.
So next month, we will be hearing from Siv Kumar, about AWS App Runner.
Oh, cool. That was actually another one I'm looking forward to because it's brand new stuff they just announced. And I'm looking forward to App Runner. Another way to run containers on AWS.
17 and counting.
Is that it? 17? Is that the official number? Wow.
So far.
You can actually see in the corner of my video, that's my Fargate container right there. It's literally a little like squeezy container. It says Fargate on it. So that's my container runner. Awesome. Kyle, thanks again for being with us. We really appreciate it and everything that you all do for supporting the community.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was nice seeing you all.